This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. This is a very special edition of the Impact Podcast because we've got with us today Jarkko Havas with us. Jarkko is the lead for the Insights and Analysis Department at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Welcome to the Impact Podcast, Jarkko.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be here.
You know, before we get going and talking about all the important and the great work that you and your colleagues are doing at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, can you share a little bit about your background, how you even got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all kind of goes back to Osaka in Japan. A little bit over 10 years ago, where I started my studies in environmental engineering.
Okay.
And moving on from there, sort of worked at a management consulting company called McKinsey in Japan first, and sort of internally in McKinsey moved to working on sort of sustainability topics, especially in agriculture and development, and then transferred to Brussels, where McKinsey had a hub on that topic, and then from there followed some colleagues who had left McKinsey to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and found my way there as well about 2 years ago now, and sort of that common thread from sort of environmental sustainability topics to now circular economy has followed throughout from my undergrad studies all the way up to now.
When you were growing up, were your parents into the environment? Was your family, or were you exposed to any of that, or did you grow up in a very green part of this planet as well, and that you were motivated, even if it was subliminally motivated? Is that part of also, when you think back, why you're doing the work you do today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, actually, sort of independently from my family, many members have moved towards that path.
Really?
My dad went from investment banking to gardening, and my, sort of at the same time as I did this, I did my studies, and my sister is very much in that field as well, sort of independently from each other. She's in Norway and did her studies in Australia. So we've been kind of doing this around the planet as a family as well. There's something to it for sure.
Yeah, that's really nice though, because you all get to share the journey together, really.
Yeah, I think so. It's just we try to make the family conversations not always about these things though.
Right, I gotcha. Well, I'm on your website now, and I had the distinct pleasure of meeting your CEO years ago, Andrew Morley, at Vice President Al Gore's office. He's just nothing but a brilliant and delightful human being, and I was very, very impressed with what he shared with me. Can you share, and your foundation's website, which I'm on right now, is ellenmacarthurfoundation.org. For our website, for our listeners and our viewers, it's ellenmacarthurfoundation.org. Can you give a little background on the foundation, what its mission and purpose is? And then we're going to go specifically into a lot of the important work that you and your colleagues are doing there right now as well.
Sure. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation started about 10 years ago now, when Dame Ellen MacArthur had a realization. So she was a competitive yachtswoman and held the fastest solo around the world navigation record at one point. But she realized that on her boat, there are limited resources, and she needs to make do with that. And that's all she has. And the planet is not really any different. And she had the idea of trying to make sense of it, and sort of ended her competitive yachting career at the peak of her performance, and started the foundation with the mission of accelerating this transition to a circular economy, where what we mean by circular economy is almost the opposite of a linear economy,
right,
where we mostly live today, where we take materials from the ground, make stuff out of that, and most of the time it ends up in waste at the end of its use. And circular economy is there to try and fix that.
And so linear economy is take it out of the ground, use it once, and then put it in the landfill, and it's gone then.
That's the simplification, yeah. Although it's never gone, really. It's in the landfill, and it loses all its value and its usability for the economy. And the whole point is to make use of those limited resources we have, especially when we talk about metals, etc. There's just as much as there is on the planet, and we need to make sure that we keep reusing that material indefinitely, really. Otherwise, eventually we will run out of it.
Jarkko, do you agree with? I've always thought about this because I've had the luck and to be able to travel a lot, and I've traveled through Europe, and I've traveled through Asia, and I have partners in both sides of the Pacific and the Atlantic, business partners. And what I've seen is Europe, and you tell me if I'm off on my thinking here. Europe, UK, Ireland, Italy, France, and all the great companies that exist on the other side of the Atlantic. And then when you have South Korea and Japan, all are smaller countries, and they have, of course, less resources, including less land to abuse. And so they were generationally, 2 generations ago, really getting part of the circular economy movement and sustainability movement back then. And now the US, Canada, areas where the land has been big and quite wasteful, and we could just build big landfills and throw away. We're starting to catch up, but really we're way behind, 30, 40 years behind the behavior that was already starting to change on both the other side of the Atlantic and Pacific before. Or am I off on that thinking, or is that too simplistic?
There's some truth to that, I think. Timeline-wise, could be a bit different. I wouldn't say that Europe is a poster child in any way in this matter. Of course, the European Union and the European Commission has taken these matters now very seriously, especially with the COVID recovery plans, accelerated the Green Deal in Europe. So taking climate mitigation efforts, the circular economy as means to achieving some of those climate goals, and then some. To the core of these plans. So I think it's more recent. But the thing is that it's ancient. That's how nature works. There is no waste in nature. In human societies, there was very little waste until the Industrial Revolution came about, and we kind of got addicted to oil and coal, and then the ability to use and abuse materials because of that sort of expansion in energy that we had available to us. And I think humanity kind of lost it there. And now we're realizing that can't go on forever. And perhaps Europe, maybe Japan is sort of policy-wise a step ahead of North America, but by no means sort of there yet either.
So since, whenever you turn on the television now here in the United States, CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, everyone's saying ESG is having a moment. Circular economy is having a moment. How does that translate to the important work that you guys have started at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and also with your goal to help transform us from a linear economy to a circular economy?
Yeah, it's a good point. And ESG data is used a lot by investors.
Yeah.
And we see exponential growth now in the money that's labeled under circular economy and going to sort of finance circular economy activities. One example is a fund, circular economy fund by BlackRock, that started now one and a half years ago. I can't remember the exact number, but it was small, 20, 30, 40 million USD. And it's now, I think, just about 2 billion. So it's just the exponential growth, and just an anecdote of that. And it's not alone. There are an increasing number of those. And it's sort of one element of this. So ESG investment in general is, of course, taking off. And I think more and more sort of academic evidence to just investor sentiment on seeing the long-term value in companies that take these things into consideration, because that gives companies the ability to avoid or mitigate a lot of supply chain risks, policy-related risks, as policy landscape moves very quickly, at least in Europe, towards sort of mandating reporting, mandating circular economy related activities, and making sure that you have extended producer responsibility things in place, etc. And at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we're also working on those topics by creating methods for companies to measure their circular economy performance and to use that data if they wish to, for example, with investors.
How do people approach you? Do you approach governments, or do government entities, NGOs, privately held, publicly traded companies approach you to help them get better at their practices, and you analyze their practices? Or how do organizations interrelate with you and then you drive change? How does that all work?
It's quite different depending on the type of organization. So we collaborate a lot with universities. We work with government, intergovernmental organizations, cities around the world. In North America, New York is a flagship city working with us on circular economy. And then with private sector. So this new tool called Circlytics, circular analytics, you could say, and short of that. But
yeah, I've never heard that before. Explain what that means. What do you? I've never heard that ever, and I live in this world because of our company. Explain what Circulytics mean. I'm fascinated by that word.
Absolutely, we indeed chose the name because before we launched that name, and you Google it, 0 hits. So great. Now all the hits on Circulytics are driving towards our tool, which is great.
I love it.
But indeed, it's a circular economy performance measurement tool for companies, and we have now over 1,000 companies that are using the tool, and I think it's around 170 companies whose headquarters are in North America. Majority still in Europe, but this is a way for companies to assess their performance and by a sort of a third-party tool. So it's not biased, but it's
so
created.
Explain how it works.
Biased, right?
A company like my company or any other company, a large, can now license this tool from you. It's a software tool, and we plug in the data, and the algorithm gives us the answers.
So it's an assessment that we do. So the stepwise process for a company would be to sign up, get an account, use an online platform to input information that you're asked, and all of that is available on our website to look at what kind of information that actually is. It's up to 36 indicators, depending on the type of business that you do. You'll then submit that information securely. We don't disclose it to anybody else. We use all the latest data security protocols to handle that. And then at the end, we produce a scorecard to send back to you and give you a license to use that scorecard and disclose that information and talk about your score with your business partners if you choose to do so.
So a company is going to be able to sign up with your organization, and eventually, as they evolve and work through this, they're going to be able to put your logo, the Circlytics logo, on their website with a score, and that will be very informative, transparently informative to their stakeholders as to how they're performing in a new circular economy world.
That's right. So we ask companies to give context to their score. So, with the score, you'd of course use the Circulating logo, but it would also say, what type of activities have you done to achieve that score, and then hopefully also say what you plan to do next, to give a little bit of context, to not just say that we got an A minus or a B plus or whatever it may be, but what's actually behind it. And we see that as a really important bit, is it the actual sort of substance behind that score. And that's just really a conversation opener to this important topic.
You know, there's obvious factors, there's obvious outcomes from companies and government entities and organizations coming into the circular economy. Obvious is it's great for carbon. It's great, you know, for the offsets. It's great for the energy savings. And as you've said at the top of the show, the resource savings are quite substantial. There's no need to dig for and mine for new aluminum if we can recycle our aluminum and our gold and our silver. But talk a little about some of the other benefits that come out of moving from a linear to circular economy for businesses and other organizations.
Yeah, well, you touched on many of those. So in certain resources, resource scarcity is a real issue. Rare earth metals, for example. And it's really like, it's a forcing mechanism really for you to think about circular economy, recirculating materials. But it's also about bottom line. So through our research and through others' research, on a system level, so on an economy level in Europe or North America, there are trillions of dollars of value in moving to a circular economy. And how that value gets distributed depends a bit on the industry, but there is certainly first mover advantages in figuring out what that looks like for you, your company and your industry. And we see that with companies we work with. So some of the largest brands in the world, Google, Nestle, Unilever, are our strategic partners, and they take this very seriously, and they see the value of moving fast and faster potentially than their competitors to figuring out what, for example, packaging for Unilever, what is circular packaging, and how can they benefit both for their bottom line and for the planet from moving into more, for example, reusable solutions.
How about in terms of some of the soft but still very substantive benefits, such as employee turnover, retention, and getting everybody focused on a mission? Aren't some of the studies starting to show that companies that have missions that are to do well and do good at the same time, to make a profit, but to make the world a better place, to transition to greener and more circular economy behavior, have higher retention rates and less turnover as well?
You said it, absolutely. And I think increasingly so with this and the next generation of employees coming to working age, it's definitely an increasingly important topic, and sort of for anybody feeling that you're doing a meaningful contribution to something else than your own bank account is definitely a motivating factor, and that's absolutely true.
How long does the process take if a company signs up with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation now and they get and they want to sign up for the Circulating process analysis? How long does that process take typically?
So it depends on how easy or difficult it is for the company to find the information to, for example, about your material flows. So if you produce goods, we would ask you, or you would need to put input data into indicators about your material flows in and out of the company. And that can take time if you're a large company. But once you've submitted, we process it fast. So everything is run on a cloud server. So the scorecard generation, we do it in batches, so a week. Although if you're a large company and we put a threshold at $1 billion USD of annual revenue, we also make a bespoke analyst commentary. So we look at your results, we look at the supporting evidence that you would provide, and then our analysts will look at where we think you're doing well and where we think you have sort of low-hanging fruits to move to next in your journey to becoming a more circular company. And depending on the time of the year, it may take us a little bit longer, but we try to make all of those scorecards where we put the commentary in also within a month. So anything from a week to a couple of months, depending on how long it takes for you to collect and submit that information as well.
Are you seeing, when did you launch the Circulytics program? Like approximately when?
exactly on the 14th of January 2020. So it's relatively new. So it's 1.5, or not even 1.5 years, and really encouraged to see that over 1,000 companies already are finding value from it. And
are you feeling now, because of the investment community now getting more circular economy, ESG excited, and voting with their pocketbooks? Are you seeing the velocity of organizations signing up for this program picking up?
Yeah, I think it's quite a steady flow, but it's interesting to hear that the companies who've completed the assessment, they've said that they've talked about their Circulating score in their investor calls, quarterly calls with their financiers, and in that sense, it's finding its way really to the heart of decision making in some of these companies.
Is it possible now? In the last 2 weeks, I read articles that Blackstone and the SEC, who governs the publicly traded companies here in the United States, both said they're going to make ESG disclosure mandatory for leadership of both publicly traded companies. At Blackstone, they said for portfolio companies. Obviously, these trends are going to spread. If Blackstone's doing it, all the other big investment groups are going to take that on as well. And if the SEC is making publicly traded companies do this, so is this now a beginning from the top down that's going to force, since they don't have their own tools, these organizations are going to turn to credible, legitimate, and great opportunities like your organization offers with Circulytics to then say, hey, we need to report now to the SEC or to leadership at Blackstone. Therefore, we need this tool to help keep us on the right side of what they're recommending.
Yeah, I think it's a very active space, this sort of non-financial measurement or disclosure standardization. So there's a lot of movement towards that and increased sort of disclosure of company performance beyond financial performance. And of course, in our opinion, circular economy is absolutely critical part of that. And we work with other organizations to make sure that circular economy ends up in those standards, future standards as well, and keep Circlytics as a deep dive sort of to really understand in more depth circular economy performance.
For our listeners and our viewers that have just joined us, we've got Jarkko Havas. He's the lead of the Insights and Analysis Department at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You can find Jarkko and his great colleagues at www.ellenmacarthurfoundation.org. What's the future look like? You're a young man. You're doing great work at a very great organization with a lot of other good colleagues. What's the future look like? How long is it going to take for everyone to get on board, or at least for a tipping point to happen, and we make real strides here?
It's a very good question, and I think there is no blanket answer to that. If you look at, for example, plastics packaging globally,
yeah,
I think we are beyond that tipping point. For plastics packaging manufacturers, it's very hard to operate without thinking about, extended producer responsibility, without thinking about where your plastic bottles, for example, end up in. And in that sense, that is eventually going to that tipping point is coming to different material streams and different industries. And circular economy generally, I think, is at a tipping point, especially in Europe, where it's finding its way into sort of, the core of policymaking in EU, and to, the way that companies are assessed and the way that investments are assessed. And circular economy taxonomy for investors is something that's coming becoming a reality in a year or two in EU, and then it is really, you need to do it, right? And it's going to affect cost of capital and everything after that as well.
That's so wonderful. I mean, your generation seems to be voting with your pocketbook more than ever before, that you really want to buy goods and services from companies that are at least trying to do the right thing. We know there's no such thing as perfect. Perfect is a bad goal, but at least making an effort. And by signing up for Circulytics, it sounds like that's one great step in the right direction. What could you say to organizations or companies that are thinking about this but are scared of what the results might be, scared of the process, scared of the just the whole aura of being green and having to go and to be examined so closely?
Well, the good things are the tool is free.
Wow.
To use, as we're a charitable organization and we get funding from our funders to run this show. And you get to choose whether you disclose your score or not. So we don't force disclosure. More and more companies choose to do that as it's beneficial, even if your score is not great. But you get to try it out. You get to understand first what your baseline is, where you're doing well, where you should do better. Even if circular economy is a new concept to you, the tool helps you with resources to understand it as you go through the process. And in a way, it's a safe space where you first can figure out where your company is today and see what you should do next to improve your score and, more importantly, improve your circular economy performance, really. Right. And then when the time is right, talk about your score with your suppliers and with your customers and indeed, the end consumer and show the potential and the performance that your company has when you choose to do so.
That makes so much sense. How can you fly an airplane if you don't have the information necessary to get to the destination?
And that's right. It's really, that's what measurement is about. It's about understanding where you're today and how quickly you're moving towards the destination that you choose. And hopefully that destination or your company strategy has circular economy in it.
Are you finding geographically the response has been similar, both EU, North America, and Asia, or is it concentrated right now on one geography, and you're going to focus? You're going to in the years ahead, you're going to focus your messaging to other regions as well that haven't come along so far.
Yeah, I think our foundation is based in the UK and sort of historically has stronger connections with Europe. So 60% of the companies that have used Circlytics are Europe-based organizations, although many operate globally. And we see slowly other regions taking up that percentage. And we've late last year released the tool in Chinese, Spanish, and Portuguese to cater to more global audiences. And we see a lot of excitement, especially in Latin America and increasingly in North America as well. So we certainly want to make this into a sort of globally used and referenced tool.
Jarkko, I'm going to leave you with the last words. I want you to share any last thoughts or comments with our listeners and our viewers, and then we're going to have to say goodbye for today. So I leave it to you.
Sure. So what I would say is that circular economy is not like a green concept that's outside of business reality. Because we live on a planet that is finite, it's an eventuality. There is no sort of way around it. We need to be able to use our materials and reuse and then reuse them again, because there's just as much as there is renewable materials. Also, we need to be able to take care of the planet that provides us these renewable materials, and that's what circular economy is about. So it's very much a core business decision for companies. And in that sense, it's not something extra, but it should be at the core of how we operate companies and the economy at large.
Well, that's great. And for our listeners and viewers out there, as Jarkko said earlier, it's a free tool. So why not learn about your own organization and learn about at least where you are, get a baseline so you can effectuate change and make it better. Jarkko, I'm so honored that you came on today. Thank you and all your colleagues at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Again, for our listeners and viewers, to find the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, go to www.ellenmacarthurfoundation.org. Thank you for making the world a better place. Thank you for making a great impact. You're always welcome back on the show. Continued success. Jarkko Havas.
Thank you, John.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Trajectory Energy Partners. Trajectory Energy Partners brings together landowners, electricity users, and communities to develop solar energy projects with strong local support. For more information on how Trajectory is leading the solar revolution, please visit trajectoryenergy.com. circulating.com.